I'm just going to give you a quick agenda rundown. We've got a lot to get through today. The first thing we're going to talk about, Doug's going to give us an overview of where we are with OCIO 2.2, which is targeted for release at the end of October. Then the big main topic we're going to dive into today is the release of our new OCIO v2 ACES configs, which as of today, the last one is out in beta, nothing like the last minute. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about OCIO v2 adoption. And our short little community survey that we did, thanks to everybody that provided us some feedback. We're going to talk about what's in progress and what you guys are asking for out of OCIO v2. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some question and answers. But yeah, like Emily said, I just want to take a minute to shout out and thanks to everybody that's participated in OCIO over the years. It's been a long time. There's a video that Doug put together for the Pipeline Conference Award that we will put out soon, as soon as we can. I think the Pipeline Conference is going to release it, so you can see a little bit about all the stuff it's taken to get this far, and it's been really cool. So I wanted to say thanks to everybody that's been through the project through a long, long time, and a special shout out to Doug and his team at Autodesk for all the work on V2. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Doug.
Thank you, Carol. It's wonderful to be back in person with everyone here after 3 years. So, as Carol said, I'm going to give an update on where we stand with OCIO 2.2. So 2.0 came out 2 years ago, and 2.1 was a year ago. And so we're working on 2.2. This is scheduled to be the VFX platform release for next year. Along with a number of the other projects, we arranged to have the final release be at the end of October for inclusion in the VFX platform. And part of the reason for that was to give us a chance to get feedback from the community here at SIGGRAPH. So we're very interested in talking about the new features with you. As always, our main branch is stable and testable. Some of the features are already in main and available for you to test. So I'm not going to read through all of this list of features, but as you can see, we've got some of them are done and some of them are still in progress. So I've selected 4 features that I think may be of general interest that I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about right now. And if you're interested in going into more detail or talking about other features, we're going to have an OCIO meetup on Wednesday that'll give us a chance to have a little bit more of a community discussion. So the first feature that I wanted to talk with you about is built-in configs. So one of the pain points with OCIO has been the need to download an external configuration. And so the ACES config, for example, that's very popular. If you download all the LUTs and everything with it, it's I think it's like about a gigabyte download. So it's been sort of a pain point historically. So one of our new features is what we're calling built-in configs. So we'll have a couple of configs, and Thomas is going to talk in more detail later about what these configs are. But the idea is that these are built into the library. So the fact that OCIO now has built-in ACES support means that we don't need the LUTs. And so essentially the config itself, in other words, the YAML file is all we need. And we can easily build that into the library. So instead of needing to download anything, you can just type this string that has the version of the config and the version of ACES and so forth that you want. And you can get that without any downloads. And we'll even have a default which will point to the current version of the CG config. Another sort of pain point that people sometimes comment on is that if they're collaborating and they need to send a config to someone else, sometimes the config file itself can get separated from the LUTs that go along with it. And so we've added a feature that will allow us to archive the config and its LUTs into what we're calling a .ocioz file, which is essentially just a zip archive. But the idea is that this will make certain workflows more reliable, and will also open the door to, if you need to embed a config into an application that you're shipping, or you need to work with a stream rather than files on disk, it opens up a number of interesting possibilities. So there will be some limitations. So right now, one workflow is people put the LUTs in the media folders so they can be scattered all over and use context variables to access them. So certain situations like that we're not going to support out of the gate, but we are going to try to support context variables to the extent possible. Another new feature has to do with external file support. So OpenColorIO and OpenEXR are both ASWF projects, and it's been a little bit awkward that we haven't had a good story for, like, how can you read an OpenEXR file and use OpenColorIO to apply the color management that's implied by the OpenEXR header. So right now, you may be familiar with the file rules feature of OCIO. That's all path-based. So it does not look at the header of the file, which some people would say is a good thing because header metadata is often unreliable. But right now, the file rules is just based on the file name. But we're looking to build a way for application developers to read header information, for example, from the OpenEXR header, and be able to call OpenColorIO to apply the color management that would be implied by that. And the way we're thinking about doing that is to basically have the application provide the header, the data from the header, so OCIO doesn't have to read the OpenEXR file itself. And then in connection with the file rules and the config, it will return an input transform. And we're starting with OpenEXR, but the idea is that this could be extended to other file formats as well. And lastly, so another topic that comes up a lot is interchange with other color spaces. So historically, each config has been its own universe of color spaces, and there was not, like in OCIO v1, there was no way to convert. Like if you wanted to go from a color space in one config to a color space in another config, there was no way to do that. And so that poses certain problems. And in OCIO v2, we introduced a feature called interchange rules. And the idea is that if both config authors include these roles that define a certain known color space, OCIO can do a conversion from one color space to another. But those were optional, and we've gotten a lot of feedback since OCIO v2 came out that that we should make them required, because if you make them required, then it allows the library itself to do very helpful conversions. One thing that comes up a lot is application developers need an sRGB space, but if they're using a user-supplied config, they don't know like which color space in the config is actually sRGB. So people do things like they will search all the color space names to see if one of them has sRGB, but that sort of thing is obviously unreliable. So we're thinking about making the interchange roles required for version 2.2 of the config, and we'd like to. All of the feedback that we've gotten so far has been very positive and asking us to do that, but we'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Carol. And as I said, if you're looking, would like to know more about the new features, please join us for the meetup on Wednesday.
Cool, thanks. Yeah. We're going to have a slide at the end, too, with all the details of the meetup, so don't feel like you have to memorize it. You can take a photo of the slide later. All right, configs. So we know that, as Doug mentioned for a long time, Thomas Mansencal, who's going to speak in a little bit, has been continuing the support of the ACES configs out of the Color Science repo for a long time. They're very widely used in the industry. A lot of people depend on them. So when we looked at OCIO v2 and really wanting to make an example out of what you could do with the new features in the library, we all decided that, one, it was time to move some configs to be officially supported in the OCIO repository under the Academy Software Foundation. And 2, that meant an entire rewrite of those configs and all of their components and how they get generated. So we did that. And as of today, we have 3 new configs that are available for download. There's this link here, and we've got a QR code at the end of this presentation, so don't feel like you have to memorize this GitHub repo, but it's there. So all the things we did was starting kind of from scratch in a lot of ways. We took inspiration from how the generators used to work, but we really did redo them. We revisited all the config contents and just looked at them and said, is this necessary? Is this still correct? Is this still relevant? Those configs were very long, lots of LUT files, all the things in them, and at the end of the day, a lot of workflows don't need half of it. So we looked at how we could help simplify those workflows. We're taking advantage of all the OCIO v2 new features. So that means all of the built-in transforms and the new view and display orientation. All of that is up to date in these configs and looks really great. And it makes the config files about half the length of the previous ones, which is really cool. And then Thomas did a ton of work, again, rewriting the whole code base, all the generators, and hopefully it'll make it easier for you to get an idea of what's happening to generate these configs and edit them to make your own. That was the other thing we really wanted you to be able to do, was customize what you wanted and what you need for your workflows in these configs and be able to generate them based on this code. So they are still based on ACEs. We really wanted to maintain continuity with our previous ACEs configs. They're widely adopted. ACEs is an open, trusted industry standard. And so we were really excited to, 1, use all of the built-in transforms for ACEs from OCIO v2, and just continue to build on all of the work that was done on the previous ACEs configs. The first config is what we're calling the reference config, and it's a complete implementation of the CTL code on ACES dev, nothing more and nothing less. And it's meant for development and testing. So if you're looking to integrate OCIO in your application or looking to verify your ACES implementation in some way, you should be able to pull this config and use it for those purposes, for testing and verification against the ACES framework. The second config is what we're calling the CG config, and that name, we're open to feedback. Obviously, a couple people have already told me it's a little confusing, but we're intending that config to be a lightweight version of an OCIO config meant for fully computer graphics generated content. So you're working on an animated feature, you're working in a game engine, all of these things where you do not need a lot of the camera input transforms that come standard in the current ACES configs. Those don't exist in the CG config. It also adds some CG texture spaces that folks might find useful, and that's another area that we're looking for input on and to add to as this config goes through iterations in beta. And then the third one, the studio config. It's most direct replacement for the version 1 ACES configs. We did a lot of work to go through, talk to all of the main camera manufacturers with existing ACES IDTs, revisit that work, generate them in CTL, make sure they're accurate and to spec and exactly as the camera vendors wanted to have them, so that we can officially say we support these. This is how this has been verified by the camera manufacturers. We've done all the work, and those exist as CLF files in our repo. And the third thing about this config is we know that moving to a completely new ACES, to a completely new OCIO config is a big undertaking for any production, any studio, any vendor. So we've gone to a decent amount of work to map the previous color space names from the old ACES configs to the new config. So you should be able to hopefully migrate a little bit smoother. We know that that's going to be a task no matter what you do. Couple major wins I want to highlight, some of the things that Doug mentioned earlier. The reference and CG config now have 0 external file dependencies other than the .ocio config themselves, which is super exciting. You can just download this YAML file and go. The studio has very few external file dependencies. It might end up having more as we add more camera input transforms to it as that list grows. And not everything is able to be a built-in config in the OCIO library itself, at least at first. So there might be some external file references for the studio config. And then, yeah, we're using all, like I said, we're using all those OCIO v2 features to simplify and shorten and better organize all of these color spaces. We're looking for feedback on all of that and just make it easier for all of you to use and customize. And I'm going to hand it to Thomas, who is dialing in all the way from New Zealand, to talk a little bit about exactly how we've done this code base.
Hello. I'm super strong. Yes, so I wanted to not maybe dive into too much details, but having an overview, on how we build these configs, So I think like the work started as a set of functions to discover, parse, and classify the CTL transform from ACESDev. So if you look at the slide here, on the left, it's not really readable, but yeah, we have some more slides. On the left, you have ACESDev, which is the input to the process, basically. So we take all the CTL transform, we parse them, classify them, and that allows us to first verify, that the CTL transform themselves are correct, So we found out some issue with the ACES transform ID, consistency in the file names, and all these things. But yeah, when we have parsed like all the CTL transform and knowing that ACES 2065-1 and OCs are connection space, we can build a graph of all the high-level relevant transform. And from that graph, that color conversion graph, we can produce a direct analytical configuration or OCIO config that maps one-to-one, each CTL transform to a theoretical OpenColorIO built-in transform. So obviously that doesn't work because OCIO doesn't have a built-in transform for OCs or like specific IDTs as they are expressed in CTL, but he has the modules to build them basically. So if we can go maybe to the next slide. Yeah, so, okay, cool. So yes, we're done with that graph. So we classify the CTL transform, we build a conversion graph, and we can produce that analytical config that doesn't really work, but is still useful to diagnose the issues in the mapping and test basic capabilities of the generator. So we don't use that. So next slide is where things get more interesting. Basically, that's where we start the work. So as Carol mentioned, we curated the list of transformed, from our color spaces from the first ACES 1.2 config, the legacy config, and we reference all those color spaces in a spreadsheet, with their corresponding CLF transform ID, and that mapping and that selection of transform, and so we have like CLF transform IDs and the corresponding built-in transform expressed in a spreadsheet with more details along the lines of categories, aliases, and that mapping file will produce what we call the reference config. So that reference config can be used directly in Nuke or any DCC package, but it's not super useful because it's lacking like what makes the studio or the CG configuration actually usable in production, as Carol described. But it's still a good tool to verify your implementation. So that's where we go next to the CLF transform. So the working group decided to express additional color transforms using CLF. There is a great feature in OCIO is that some CLF transform can be serialized directly into the config, so it reduces the need for external files. So not everything can be serialized, but a significant amount of stuff can be. So we decided to create like a series of CLF transforms. They are available in a repo, a bit alongside. I mean, it's very similar to ACESDev in a way, So there is a set of CTL transform in ACESDev. We have a set of CLF transform in in OpenColorIO sysconfig repository, and similarly to the CTL transform, we classify them, parse them, and then we have a set of transforms that can be used again, by the generator for the CG config. We'll also use a spreadsheet to decide, okay, we want to have that transform represented in the final config, etc., etc. So that's the process for the CG config generator generation, sorry, and the studio config generator follows again the same process with a spreadsheet that is a bit different, with more data, more transform cherry picked basically, but the generator is the same for practical purposes. So the process is really sysdev discovery and classification. We generate the reference config. On top of that, in parallel, the CLF transform are discovered and classified, and then the CG config is happening. I think that's kind of it. So if you look in the slide earlier, there was a Miro board, that described, I forgot to mention that, but there is a link to a Miro board. So if people are interested, they can look again at that, with more details. That's it for me.
So I just wanted to elaborate on what Thomas was said. I think one of the cool things about the generator that Thomas has created is that it helps make the process more sustainable, so that as changes are made on the ACES side, like as ACES dev gets updated, the generator is set up to kind of pull those into the config. And as camera vendors add new CLF transforms to our repo, very minimal changes are needed, if any, on the generator side to kind of put out a new revision of the configs that update over time. So hopefully this will be a very nice and sustainable way to keep these configs current and track changes in the underlying developments in cameras and ACES and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks a ton, Doug. We hope that you all will use this lovely QR code. It takes you to our release page, which you'll notice we released the beta of the studio config about an hour before this talk. So please forgive us if we've made mistakes. We know that there's probably lots of them. We know with the studio config in particular, there's already definitely a couple things that are missing and will definitely be in there. You'll notice that the log C4 from ARI didn't make it in for this first release. There's a PR up for it. We're working on getting it integrated. So when you ask where's the ARI, it's coming. And a couple other little small bits of feedback that we already know, but please give us your feedback, download the configs and give it a try, because we do have a timeline. We want the final official first version of these configs to be out with OCIO 2.2 at the end of October. So it's about 2 months. A little more than 3 months.
And yeah, and if you have feedback on the naming or color spaces that you think should be in that are not in, or that are in but you don't think should be in. I had an interesting discussion yesterday with some people at DigiPro about whether Rec 709 camera should still be in the config, because it can cause more confusion than so anyway, we're very interested in hearing your feedback on these configs.
Yeah, I feel like our last 2 to 3 config working group meetings have just been discussing what to name everything, which, as everybody knows, is a whole bunch of fun. So, all right. So the next thing we want to spend a few minutes talking about, and yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it. I know you probably have heard if you've been around for some of the other talks today. We wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about what it means to release and try and integrate a major new version of an open source piece of software that is really highly adopted in a lot of pieces of software across the industry. We did a survey of the community about a month ago, just asking folks for feedback, and really the intent of it was to get some real data for what to talk about in this presentation today, but it actually showed some really interesting graphs that we decided to talk a little bit about, not instead of, but in addition. And we asked a couple questions of, are you using OCIO v2 yet? Are you using the configs? Are you just using the library? Are you not using it at all? And if you're not, why not? And if you have any plans to upgrade, and what your timeline looks like. And so you can see on these graphs, hopefully the text might be really hard to read, sorry. But overall, it's split a lot, with the majority of folks still not upgraded to OCIO v2, or only using it at the library, only still using v1 configs, simply because they've upgraded to applications that have OCIO v2 in it, which is great. And the main reason that they haven't been able to upgrade fully to configs or whatever is because it's not supported in all software yet. And so we just wanted to spend a couple minutes and talk about the realities of what it's been like. You know, Doug mentioned OCIO v2 was released almost 2 years ago now, and we've spent those 2 years since then, of course, releasing versions and putting new features in the code. But we've also spent a ton of time on things like documentation and things like these configs. And the configs we really hope will help folks' adoption of OCIO v2 by giving you an example of what's possible and a place to sort of start from, because we recognize that this is a big upgrade with a lot of changes, and it means some changes to your workflows. So we hope that those configs will help. Michael Dolan and Mark Titchener from the Foundry have also been leading a UI and UX working group, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a couple slides. And we just wanted to spend just a minute and talk about implementation in software and how that works. We just want to emphasize the point that it's not automatic and it's not fast. And a lot of it relies on you, the users of OpenColorIO or the developers of OpenColorIO, asking the software that you use every day to integrate new features and new versions of software. Because at the end of the day, these software manufacturers are doing what their customers want and what their customers need. And so Doug and I can talk to them as, you know, the leaders of the OCIO project and say, hey, we've got an exciting new version, you should put it in your software. And they'll say, yeah, okay. And they're excited about it. It's not like they're not excited about it, but they have a million things on their development schedules and their development roadmaps. And so it gets put in a priority list, and the only thing that bumps it up in that priority list is people asking for it.
Yeah, the voice of the customer is so important in getting these things implemented. And the other reason we wanted to talk about it is because we feel this is a problem that is not specific to OCIO. It's like a lot of the ASWF projects are big industry initiatives, and they have to be rolled out across a lot of applications, and workflows have to be updated and all of that. So that's part of the reason why we're kind of sharing the actions that we're taking to try to make this happen. But I think that there's room for maybe some ASWF coordination in terms of like rolling out a major new version. How do you get that adopted throughout the industry?
Yeah, so we just want to spend a minute on this, and if you have got questions or feedback for us later on things we could do, if you're a software vendor and you have opinions on things we could do to make it easier for you or faster for you, and then also as a customer, if you've got feedback for us on just does it matter to you? It matters to us quite a lot, obviously, and we'd love to see OCIO v2 in all of these applications. Because the other thing that we see is everything for example, everything in a visual effects vendor's pipeline needs to be able to use OCIO v2 before you can migrate, because maintaining two different versions of a library is just untenable. And so that's a lot of what we see, is just a lot of holdback until the last player on the block kind of gets on board. And so we'd love your help in order to make that happen, because we really believe that once you get over this hump, it's like the Python 3 migration, right? We don't want it to be a 6-year process to get everybody over to OCIO v2. We'd really like it to be maybe half that, would be a great goal. So that's what we wanted to say on that subject today. And I wanted to plug a little bit. Michael Dolan couldn't be here in person today, but I think I think he's on Zoom, and we'll say hi to him. And him and Mark Tishner from the Foundry have been doing a ton of work over this year along UI and UX. So we realized that, OCIO, the library is a part and the config is a part, but also a huge part of OpenColorIO is how it's integrated and surfaced to an end user in an application, and how you make decisions along those lines. And we went through and we listed a whole bunch. This group has done a whole bunch of writing and a whole bunch of IDing around all the different types of UI and UX stuff that goes into integrating OpenColorIO in an application. And that's a few of them are listed here. And once you kind of go and you start listing things out and you look at all the things, you take an example of an application like Maya and look at all the different choices a user has or a developer has to set for their artists and their users, and where those come from and why they're decided, and can you make this happen automatically? What heuristics are available to you to help make these decisions a little bit smarter? And there's tons. There's a lot. So we're working through them. This group is trying to break through some of common misconceptions around things and hopefully put out some documentation that helps folks get started on how we think, we've started to think about some of these standardized UI and UX paradigms. Obviously, with the flexibility that we know that in your application, you need the flexibility to do what you need to do. But we just thought having a starting point would be really helpful for a lot of these cases, and there's more similarities than not.
And some sample code as well. So we have in the OCIO repo, we have some what's called app helpers, which are, help for generating menus of color spaces and things like that. So, and we have some exciting work that will be, that's sort of in progress of another sample app that we think will be very useful for developers.
So yeah, they meet monthly right now, Mondays at 10 a.m. Pacific. You can find it on our calendar. We'll have a link to where all our meetings are at the end of the presentation. They also have a Slack channel, if that's easier for you. If you've got feedback, if you like the way something works in an application, please give us that feedback. We need that this is great. We like how this works. It's great in our workflow, as well as all the stuff that we know probably needs fixing. So that's our UI and UX plug. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is the other thing we put in the survey was a whole bunch of questions around what do you want to see in OCIO? And we phrased those questions in a couple different ways. One of them we asked was, what's the most important existing issue or bug or ticket that exists right now in our GitHub that you'd like to see fixed? But then the other thing that we asked was, long term, what features would you like to see in OpenColorIO and what's most important to you? And so a list of them, we listed a few of them here, or this slide has the ones that we got this feedback, and we wanted to let you all know that from that survey, some of your responses are already existing or in progress development, and those are listed here. The configs that we talked about today are fully ACES and therefore AMF compliant, which is great. Again, we're talking about the UI UX, which is the role guidelines for DCCs. OCIO v2, released 2 years ago, has full support for all the ACES dev components, which is great. And then Doug talked a little bit about the feature that we're going to make mandatory in OCIO 2.2, which is that bridge to external color spaces. So for those folks that responded for those things in the survey, thank you for that feedback, and let us know if you've got questions on how we've done any of those. We also got, go ahead.
And for AMF, I gave a presentation at the Hollywood Post Alliance conference about AMF support in OCIO, and that's in progress, and I think we will have that presentation on our website shortly.
Yeah. But there was a lot of great ideas and some things for future work and things that need discussion here. And so we don't have time to go through all of these things, but we wanted to put them on a list here and say we got that feedback. And these are great topics, and a couple of them, hopefully if folks bring them to the table at our meetup on Wednesday, we'd love to hear your use cases for a few of them. Some of them are pretty obvious, and yes, we'd love to see an OCIO adapter and OpenTimeline.io. We think that that's really great and something that we should definitely do in the future. But there's a couple that we'd like to hear a little bit more about what you're after in some of these features, like an expression language or CTL support. Like, what would you really get out of that? What's your use case? And to help us better integrate that and decide the priority of it and when to tackle it. Wanted to say, for those that haven't really been able yet to dive into OCIO 2.0, we did a SIGGRAPH course last year, and that's available online. So it's a long one. It's like, what, 3 hours that we did? So block out some time, and if you want to dive deep into OCIO 2.0, that course is available online for free. And then here's the details about the meetup on Wednesday. Autodesk was kind enough to book us a meeting room. So this is the address and the time. It's a quick walk from here. And then we're going to have a little happy hour after. So we hope you'll join for that.
OpenColorIO.
OpenColorIO, you heard it here first.
Mostly I.
Yeah, that's the hope. So yeah, here's a last slide of lots of things. We hope that all of this has been useful to you, but we know that this is a lot of information and we've got a lot going on. So here's a quick slide of where you can find us, where you can reach out and contact us, and we're looking forward to hearing your feedback. And I think, Emily, do we have time for questions?
Maybe just like one
All
question,
right.
maybe two.
All right, cool.
Any questions?
Really fast. Oh yeah.
That's what they always say.
I know. OpenColorIO and RV. I know that's a Autodesk, but it's not a question for you guys, but it is ish. Doug, I don't know if you...
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Deke. So many of you heard the exciting news in the previous session about RV being open sourced. So it's currently on the roadmap, but definitely for people who are interested in that, there might be a faster way to accelerate that development. But it's definitely something that we would like to see happen. So if anyone's interested and has energy in making that happen sooner rather than later, please let me know.
If I missed this, but I tried to find the room. But where are we at with removing the tone mapper and having almost a tone mapper as part of the entire pipeline? Because we run into a lot of trouble with the RRT and not having an RRT and being able to maybe write your own tone mappers and inject them into OpenColorIO and have the transforms through those tone mappers.
One of the architectural enhancements in OCIO v2 was to break out the view transform as a separate step. So it's definitely possible to put in your own view transforms. In the ACES configs that we were talking about a little bit earlier, we added something that's not in the ACES dev called the untone mapped view transform. So if you just want to see something without an S-curve on it for diagnostic or because you're looking at a texture or something, there's a way to do that in the ACES configs. But it's very, and these can also serve as an example for people who are writing their own configs and want to put in view transforms that are kind of special purpose or that don't have as much a contrast or S-curve roll-off or what have you.
Okay, so it's been implemented, but there's no real standardization. Because Resolve has some of their own, and like we have some of our own, but it's kind of a little bit wild west out there right now.
Yeah, and also we should probably mention that the ACES project is working on revving the output transforms for ACES 2.0. So that's also essentially an open source initiative, and I know if you have energy around that, I'm sure they'd be very interested in having you contribute to that or get involved to give feedback. They have 3 candidate transforms that they're testing right now.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll add to that before we get out of here is that you can use whatever output transform you'd like to in OpenColorIO. It's an agnostic pipeline framework. We base things on ACES because it is an open standard and a very well-tested one. But again, as Doug said, this is meant to be an example. OCIO is just a framework for your color transforms, not a dictation of how or what to do.
It's the mixing of these. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.